December 20th, 1943, North Atlantic, 250 miles off the coast of Iceland. The B-17 bomber limped through freezing air, trailing smoke like a dying comet. Franz Stigler's Messerschmitt Bf-109 closed in from behind. His finger rested on the trigger. One burst would end it. But as he pulled alongside the crippled bomber, his breath caught. Through the shattered plexiglass, he saw something that made him forget every order he'd ever received. Wounded men slumped over their guns. Blood streaked the fuselage. The tail gunner's position hung empty, torn open like a wound. And in that frozen moment, 27,000 feet above a merciless sea, Franz Stigler made a choice that would haunt and define him for the rest of his life. If you're captivated by untold stories of humanity amid war's darkest hours, hit that like button and subscribe to join our community of history seekers. Drop a comment telling us where you're watching from. We read every single one and love connecting with viewers across the globe. Now, let's uncover a story that proves even in war's deepest abyss, the human spirit can rise above hatred. The war had taught men to see enemies as targets, numbers, silhouettes to be eliminated. By 1943, the skies over Europe had become an industrial slaughterhouse, where young men killed each other from cockpits and gun turrets, separated by nothing but thin aluminum and thinner mercy. The Luftwaffe had lost over 2,800 pilots that year alone. The Allied bombing campaign had turned German cities into craters. Every mission was a mathematics of survival. Every hesitation could mean death. Charlie Brown, the American pilot fighting to keep his B-17 airborne, had watched half his crew get wounded over Bremen minutes earlier. Anti-aircraft fire had shredded his bomber during the raid. One engine was dead, another sputtered on fumes. Hydraulics were failing. The compass spun uselessly. His co-pilot slumped unconscious, blood seeping through his flight suit. The ball turret gunner had taken shrapnel to the leg. The waist gunner's face was pale as winter snow. They were flying a coffin held together by rivets and prayer. Franz Stigler had already shot down 2 bombers that morning. One more kill would earn him the Knight's Cross, Germany's highest honor. His score stood at 27 confirmed victories. He was a veteran of the North Africa campaign, a skilled hunter who knew every trick of aerial combat. He'd been taught that American bombers were terror weapons, machines that killed German women and children in their beds. Mercy was a luxury no one could afford. But his commander's words echoed in his mind. Gustav Radl had once told him, "If I ever see you shoot at a man in a parachute, I will shoot you down myself." Honor, even in war, had limits, lines that should never be crossed. And as Franz pulled his fighter alongside that shattered B-17, he didn't see a target. He saw men barely alive, clinging to a machine that should have already fallen from the sky. The bomber's waist gunner spotted the Messerschmitt and tried to swing his .50 caliber gun toward it. His hands shook. The weapon wouldn't traverse. The hydraulics were gone. He was defenseless. Franz could see the terror in the American's eyes. He could see everything through the torn metal and broken glass. The intimacy of that moment was obscene. War wasn't supposed to work this way. You weren't supposed to see your enemy's fear, his wounds, his humanity. Franz waved his hand, a gesture that meant, "Don't shoot." "I won't either." Charlie Brown, disoriented and bleeding from a head wound, couldn't process what was happening. Why wasn't the German fighter attacking? Why was it flying formation beside them, so close their wingtips almost touched? Through the fog of pain and shock, Charlie watched the Messerschmitt match his speed, his altitude, his desperate path toward safety. They flew together for 10 minutes, an eternity measured in heartbeats and frozen breath. Franz positioned himself between the crippled bomber and German coastal batteries. He knew the flak gunners below would see the B-17 and open fire, but they'd also see his fighter. They'd hesitate. Confusion would buy seconds. Seconds would buy miles. Miles would buy lives. The German coast passed beneath them. Franz saluted, a brief, formal gesture. Then he broke away, rolling his Messerschmitt into a steep dive and vanishing into the winter haze. Charlie Brown watched him go, unable to speak, unable to understand. His co-pilot was coming to. "What happened?" he mumbled. Charlie had no answer, only the impossible memory of an enemy who chose mercy over medals. The B-17 barely made it back to England. It crash-landed at Seething, the undercarriage collapsing on impact. The crew stumbled out, half dead, into the arms of medics who couldn't believe they'd survived. Charlie Brown filed his mission report, but left out the part about the German fighter escort. He knew what headquarters would say impossible. Propaganda, delusion. Who would believe that a Luftwaffe ace had saved an American bomber crew? Franz Stigler returned to base and said nothing. Not to his squadron mates, not to his commanders. He'd violated standing orders. Letting an enemy bomber escape was treason. If the wrong person heard the story, he'd face a court-martial. Or worse, the war had grown desperate. Germany was losing, though few would admit it yet. Mercy was becoming a capital offense. But the memory stayed with both men. It burned in their minds through the remaining years of war and the decades that followed. Charlie returned to combat, flew more missions, watched more friends die. He never forgot the silhouette of that Messerschmitt, the hand that waved instead of firing. Franz flew until the end, surviving the war by luck and skill while so many of his comrades fell. He never claimed that final kill that would have earned him the Knight's Cross. The price had been too high. The war ended, Europe rebuilt. The dead were counted and mourned. Charlie Brown went home to America, married, started a business, tried to live a normal life. But some nights he'd wake up seeing that German fighter through his shattered cockpit glass. He started wondering, who was he? Did he survive? Why did he do it? The questions gnawed at him for 40 years. In 1986, Charlie decided to find out. He placed an ad in a combat pilot newsletter. A long shot. A desperate hope. To the German fighter pilot who escorted a badly damaged B-17 out of Germany on December 20th, 1943. I was the pilot of that bomber. I would like to make contact. 4 years passed. Then a letter arrived from Canada. Neat handwriting. German accent visible even in English script. I was that fighter pilot. Franz Stigler had seen the ad. He debated for days whether to respond. Old wounds, old wars, old enemies. But something compelled him, maybe the need to know that his choice had mattered, that those men he'd saved had lived full lives, that mercy hadn't been wasted. They arranged to meet, January 1990, a hotel in Seattle. Charlie Brown waited in the lobby, nervous as a teenager. He'd fought Germans, hated Germans, lost friends to Germans. But this was different. The doors opened. An elderly man walked in, silver-haired, dignified, moving with the careful precision of a former fighter pilot. Their eyes met. Recognition flashed, despite 47 years and a world of change. They'd both grown old. They'd both survived. They embraced like brothers. Over coffee, they reconstructed that December day. Franz explained his decision. I looked into your plane and saw the devastation. You were no threat. Shooting you would have been murder. Charlie described his confusion, his terror, his gratitude. They compared notes, matched details, confirmed what both had carried in memory for half a lifetime. Every detail aligned. The torn tail section, the wounded crew, the salute. It had all been real. They became inseparable friends. Brothers forged not in combat, but in its refusal. They attended reunions together, spoke at schools, shared their story with anyone who would listen. The bomber pilot and the fighter ace who'd chosen humanity over duty. Their families merged, celebrating holidays together, building bridges across old battle lines. The men who should have been enemies became living proof that war's hatred isn't permanent, that choices matter, that one moment of mercy can echo across decades. Franz would joke, "I spent the whole war trying to shoot down bombers. Finally got one lined up perfectly, and I couldn't do it." Charlie would respond, "And I spent the whole war being shot at. The one time someone had me dead to rights, he saved my life instead." They'd laugh, but the laughter carried weight. The knowledge of how close death had come. How easily that story could have ended differently. Military historians studied their encounter, verified every detail, confirmed Franz's service record, Charlie's mission logs, the damage reports on the B-17. It was documented, authenticated, undeniable. But the story remained almost unknown outside aviation circles, too strange, too hopeful, too incompatible with the simple narratives people preferred about war. Good versus evil, us versus them, kill or be killed. The nuance made people uncomfortable. Other stories emerged, quiet, buried accounts of similar moments. A German U-boat commander who surfaced to rescue drowning Allied sailors, knowing it could mean his own death. A British pilot who escorted a damaged Luftwaffe bomber out of English airspace. American soldiers who shared rations with starving German prisoners. Japanese and Australian troops who called unofficial truces to evacuate wounded. These weren't widespread. They didn't change the war's outcome, but they happened. Small islands of humanity in an ocean of violence. The difference between these stories and the propaganda was honesty. Neither side pretended their enemies were saints. Franz had shot down 27 bombers before meeting Charlie. Charlie had dropped bombs on German cities. They'd both killed. They'd both followed orders, but they'd also recognized a line. A boundary beyond which duty became murder and survival became cruelty. War demanded violence. It didn't demand inhumanity. Charlie's crew members, when they learned the full story decades later, reacted with stunned gratitude. The tail gunner wept. The ball turret gunner, who'd lost part of his leg that day, shook Franz's hand with both of his and said simply, "Thank you for my life." They'd all married, raised children, built careers. Those children had given them grandchildren. Entire family trees existed because one man had chosen not to pull a trigger. But the story also haunted Franz. He'd saved 10 men that day. How many had he killed in his 27 victories? How many German civilians had died because he'd failed to stop other bombers? The calculus of war was impossible. One act of mercy couldn't balance the ledger. He didn't try to claim redemption. He simply lived with the weight, as all combat veterans do, carrying ghosts that never entirely fade. In 2008, Charlie Brown passed away. Franz followed 8 months later. They'd been friends for 18 years, inseparable in old age after being enemies in youth. Their obituaries ran side by side in military publications. The bomber pilot and the fighter ace, the American and the German. The men who proved that even in history's most brutal war, humanity could survive. Their stories spread slowly after their deaths. Books, documentaries, school curriculum. A new generation discovered that war's truth is more complex than its mythology. That enemies are still human. That mercy takes more courage than violence. That the moments we choose define us more than the uniforms we wear. Franz and Charlie, became symbols of something war tries to kill but can never quite destroy: the stubborn, illogical, beautiful human capacity for compassion. The B-17 Charlie flew that day no longer exists. Scrapped decades ago for aluminum. Franz's Messerschmitt was probably shot down by someone else, melted and reformed. The physical artifacts are gone, but the choice remains, documented, remembered, a story that refuses to fade because it answers a question every generation asks: in the worst circumstances, can people still choose good? The answer, written in frost at 27,000 feet over a frozen sea, is yes. Not always, not easily, not without cost, but yes. Franz Stigler proved it when his finger left the trigger. Charlie Brown proved it when he spent 40 years searching for the man who saved him, not for revenge but for gratitude. 10 crew members proved it by living full lives and teaching their children that enemies can become friends. War creates millions of stories. Most are about death, destruction, loss. Those stories matter. They teach us the cost of violence. But stories like this matter too. They teach us that cost can be refused, that duty can be questioned, that mercy can exist even when everything around us demands cruelty. They don't make war noble. Nothing makes war noble, but they make survivors human. December 20th, 1943, a damaged bomber and a fighter that didn't fire. 2 men who should have killed each other and chose differently. 47 years of wandering, 18 years of friendship, and a lesson written in the silent space between a finger and a trigger, that the truest victory isn't defeating your enemy. It's recognizing them as human, even when everything orders, fear, hatred, history tells you not to. Especially then,